Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest session of the Property Lounge webinar by Sarah and I, the property marketing strategists. We've got a great webinar today, as usual, and obviously a great, wonderful panel to talk about that, where we are going to be talking about customer experience, retention, referrals, how we maintain our customers, how we keep them happy, and how we make sure that they bring us repeat business. We developed on this topic following a kind of youth forum. We run youth forum sessions where we speak to a number of kind of young people around their feelings around kind of their living environments. And we did a recent forum around this topic, customer service, customer experience, and we had some really interesting findings, and we thought, well, we wanted to bring this into the forum to discuss more what we found, and with our expert panel around what we can do more, what we should be doing as a sector, and how we keep our customers happy. We will in a minute be going around our virtual sofa to let our guests introduce themselves. But today we will also be doing a couple of polls, so please keep an eye out for those and please join in. If you do have any questions for the panel, please try and put them in the Q&A and not the chat, because that will make it easier for us to manage. But we're delighted to have you here, and without further ado, we'll move on to introducing our guests. So John, would you like to start for us?
Sure, yes. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much to Sarah and Deanie for inviting me onto the panel today. I've known Sarah for over 10 years. We first met when we worked for IQ, when it was a lot smaller business than it is today. I've over 20 years experience working within the property industry. The first part of my career was working for social housing, and then I moved across to PBSA in 2008. And in that time, I've now worked for owners, third-party operators and investors. And in all my roles, I've been responsible for kind of service delivery, all aspects of operations in new developments across the UK. More recently, I worked for an investor responsible for a new portfolio in Spain and Portugal. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of my own insights today and learning and hearing from the other members of the panel as well.
That's great, thanks, John. And Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, thank you very much for having me. So my name is Hannah, and I was a student at the University of Bristol. So I graduated back in 2019, and shortly after graduating, launched HYBR. Really started off as an educational platform there to support students, helping them become responsible students and understanding their rights and their obligations as a tenant so they can be better tenants. So HYBR is a student accommodation platform where we support first-time renters, providing them with everything they need in one place. And I'm really excited to learn from the rest of the panel and discuss how we can better support our students and ensure they have a great time at university.
Great, thank you. And Fathi?
Hi, I'm Fathi Mohamoud. I've worked in the student housing sector for just over 10 years now. I've basically done every role you can imagine. I started off as a summer temp, working my way to head of operations currently for Aparto, which is part of the Hines Real Estate Group. Previously to that, I also worked at IQ, both in London and Manchester, and also Greystar. I was one of the first people there when they started in 2014 with the Unite purchase, and kind of helped set up the platform from an operations perspective in the early days.
That's great, thank you, and welcome to all of you. Sarah?
Well, we're going to hit the ground running. We're going to go straight in with a big question. So you all work in service-led businesses. What things do you do to ensure the loyalty of your customers? Who wants to grab that first? Fathi, you look like you're ready to go.
Well, I guess personally, not myself, but with the support of our marketing team, I think we run probably the best experience program in the industry, I would say. Just throughout the pandemic, the engagement rates that we've received, the number of events we've ran both virtually and also in person has just been, astronomical. I think the numbers being an experience brand, that's very important to us, and we use sort of the marketing function and also students that we hire in-house as events and content assistants to kind of deliver that service. Another thing like we try to focus on is high quality teams as well within our property operations. So we're kind of a small outfit. We don't have a large head office function. So for us, people on the ground delivering the results that we need are sort of a critical factor to the way that we kind of maintain our competitive edge and support the landlords and funds that we work on behalf of.
Right. I mean, Hannah, your business is a little bit different. I guess you can look at this question twofold: is what do you do to keep people coming back to your platform, but also what things do you think keep people, rebooking their accommodation as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I think for us, the first step is making sure people understand our story. So why we're doing what we're doing, and that really helps them buy into our kind of journey and really understand the concept and how we're trying to do something different within the space. And then of course, it's about the customer experience. So excellent support and hand-holding from the moment they first come onto the website, making those kind of UX tweaks that you need to make, to the point that when they contact the team and have that really great first conversation, when we talk them through thinking about their rental priorities, what do I care about in terms of my budget or the location or the facilities, who do I want to live with, making sure all of those questions are answered, and then they can kind of go through that whole process until they book through us. And I think it's also about going beyond that. So even if we can't help them, even if it's outside of our remit, it's really important for us to still be able to recommend them to trusted third parties. So we never say, no, we can't help you. We kind of go above and beyond to make sure that they're fully supported throughout their kind of journey with us.
Right. And John, you've worked in lots of different areas. What do you see as being vital to ensuring the loyalty of customers?
Yeah, I think building on those points that Hannah just said about you have that aspiration, I think, as an operator, have that kind of seamless customer journey from that first touch point all the way through. And I think you've really got to work hard on those initial calls and emails and getting them to book and sign up. And then even actually before they move in, you want to have that kind of dialogue to build that, relationship. And then the move-in day is obviously crucial, that first impression that you want to generate. Sometimes it doesn't always go to plan. And if in that the case, then you need to be able to rectify it. It's the speed and the ability of how you respond when things go wrong. But I think once the students have moved in, I think you want to create like a fun, safe environment with loads of social events and provide a really supportive place to live. I think another really kind of key element of PBSA is that not only have you got the customer, the student, but also you've got their parents, which you also have to make an impression on if they're paying for the rent. So you've got a kind of unique situation there. But I think the kind of key elements of loyalty, which probably extend to kind of BTR and for students, is building that community, having a great atmosphere in your building, those variety of social events. I think you really need effective management even on the basics like cleaning and repairs and parcels, because I think repairs and parcel management is probably the two most common forms of interaction between staff and residents. So you really need to get that right. And I think another element is like everybody loves free stuff. So if you're able to provide free things like, I'm not just talking about a token, once every 6 months, some free donuts. I'm talking like on a regular basis, you provide events, you provide free things, coffee and drinks and promotions and Easter egg hunts and all kind of fun things. I think people really, really like that. If you see the feedback from residents, if they really enjoy that kind of those gestures that you genuinely care about them and you're providing them things. And ultimately also the final point I probably would say is that if you're wanting people to kind of rebook, you need to give them a generous offer. Sometimes they can overlook some of those other points if you've given them a really generous rebooker offer that may entice them to stay on longer.
Well, that's interesting, John, because that brings on to the next question. So in the youth forum that Deanie was talking about, 92% of respondents that we spoke to said bad service would put them off booking again. However, it could be said that most students only stay for a year, so you don't need to work that hard on retaining them. What would you say to this, all of you?
I think, well, I can start us anyway. I think the problem with providing bad service is the building can gain a bad reputation, and it's really easy for them to do that, particularly with people composting, Google reviews and student reviews. And the challenge with when you get bad reviews is changing them, and changing that rating can take, quite a very long time. I've been in a position where I've inherited buildings from a previous management kind of regime where they've had poor ratings, and it takes several years and a lot of hard work to be able to change it. So I really think that despite the profile of your students, maybe they do change a lot through that year and you don't have a very large rebooker pool, you've still got to maintain and aim to provide a good service. And I think another thing that, particularly through COVID in the last couple of years, that the profile of your student sort of base has changed because of the lack of international students, or that, you know, during 2019 and 20. And that meant you were focusing on UK students, and that means you might have had more first years and second years which have the ability to rebook. So I don't think you can rest on your laurels what happens one year, because the way the market is, it can change the next. So I think you always should be aiming to provide that good service, because of that longer term impact if you don't.
Hannah, you were nodding a lot through what John was saying. Yeah, what's your view on that?
I was just going to say that I think it's really interesting here to distinguish between HMO and PBSA and build to rent, because I think there's a lot that the market in general can learn from the short-term rental market. I think if you look at Airbnb, it's kind of taken for granted that the host is going to treat the guests really well and maybe have a bottle or something and a card when they arrive at the property. Whereas in the HMO market, it's very transactional. There's no kind of thinking about the student tenant as a customer and thinking about those little touches that the PBSA world is getting right a lot more of the time nowadays. So I think there's a lot that the kind of HMO and the more private rental market can learn from the short-term rental market, and how you should treat your tenants to ensure they have that good experience and that you can tell their friends. Because even if you think about it just as a year, like if you're trying to target a third year student in their last year, reputation is everything, not only on a Google review, as you were saying, but actually just in terms of word of mouth and speaking to their friends. So it's so important that you can have that good reputation, that their friends can say positive things. And I think, yeah, just one more thing on that review part, I think it's so important to show that those Google reviews or those Trustpilot reviews are not being hidden away and ignored, that they're being responded to, and that there's reasons provided why something went wrong and what's being done about it and how things are going to change, rather than just trying to reject and block the account, which I think happens.
And Fathi, just I guess the point, I guess, is that sometimes students are going to stay longer. You know, I always think when a student comes into you, if they're in their first year, you've actually got 3, potentially more years if they end up staying longer. So, you know, do you think it's short-sighted just to think of students as transient?
I don't think it's short-sighted. It might actually be a benefit in some cases, because if you look at it, you see the proliferation of 51-week contracts. And who's that targeting? Well, you're going to target postgraduates principally, and they might only be there for 1 year because it's a master's course, unless they're PhD students. So by setting up the offer in a certain way that you're kind of skewing the people that are going to be coming to your property towards postgraduates, means that there's going to be a transient population, and your respondents are not wrong. You know, I would say around 25% of our students rebook, but that doesn't mean that we don't stop targeting a high rebooking rate, because the other factor I have to consider as an operator is the network effect, right? So if I can capture 25% of my population as rebookers at a low acquisition cost, and they recommend 1 friend each, right? That's already 50% of the portfolio filled at a relatively low cost point in terms of marketing. So yeah, there is a transient population, but I think that's probably a little bit by design of operators pushing more 51-week contracts as well.
Thank you. I mean, getting to the conversation about sort of different products, and Hannah, you were just talking about the difference between PBSA and HMOs. We've seen more evidence recently that students are choosing to build to rent properties over traditional student accommodation. You got any insight as to why this might be? John, I know you've had some experience in that field. You know, what is it maybe that build to rent are doing differently to PBSA and HMOs to attract those customers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this to start with. I think Wembley's a good example of this. I mean, Wembley has lots of great student accommodation. It's got Scape, CRM, Unite, IQ, you know, lots of variety of room types and price points that you can choose from. But I've been around the Quintain living apartments, and I think the allure of some of those properties, they are really desirable. They are really, you know, they're beautiful properties with great communal facilities for a slightly higher price point. But I think they may, you know, students may feel there's more freedom and more autonomy than you may get in a PBSA building. But I think also, conversely, you would get less support and guidance that you might do otherwise. But I think an interesting point for operators, though, is that if you read some reviews of BTR schemes where there's a mix of students and predominantly young professionals, sometimes you get like a lifestyle clash where there's noise, parties, smoking, etc., which I think poses a real challenge for operators. The local team's going to have to deal with that, because I think, like with any student or BTR scheme, they want to fill them as quickly. They're under pressure to fill them, so they will take students in. So getting that right mix of customers I think can be a real challenge, and balancing that out, those lifestyle changes and differences between them, isn't easy and ongoing. And I think that that's something that perhaps isn't really considered until actually it's happening and they've got to manage it.
Thank you.
One thing just to add on to that, just reminded me, I think that's also, in terms of thinking about who you're going to be living next to, is such an important thing to take into account in terms of retention rates and dropout rates, because so many students that we encounter who go into PBSAs end up not liking the person that they think they're going to go into a studio, which they are, but they still have shared facilities. And if they don't like the person they're living next to, that really impacts their experience of the whole accommodation and the brand itself, which can be unfair on the brand. So I think that's an interesting point raising about the build to rent, about the young professionals, but it's also something that we try and help PBSAs and build to rent, people in the build to rent sector, to make sure that we can try and house students in the same way you do in the HMO market. So if you have a group of 5 or a group of 10 people that really like each other, about making sure that they can be fitted into that building as close proximity as possible, to ensure that they really enjoy that experience and that you can start making that community feel. And then just a final point in terms of why they're going to the build to rent, I think what's interesting is that within the HMO market, it's getting more and more expensive and rates are rising like crazy. So it's really not that different. So if you're thinking about previously going to an HMO property, but then you're directly comparing the price with a build to rent, you're getting a nicer property in terms of the way it's kept. And it's actually not even that much more expensive now. So I think that's a bit of an interesting one.
Well, definitely, I guess what you're just pointing out is how competitive the market's getting. So everybody needs to provide amazing service, and that kind of differentiation of product and service. We did a poll while you guys were chatting there, and it was around incentivizing customers. So firstly, 92% said yes, they think that we should incentivize to get referrals. Playing devil's advocate here, if somebody was so impressed with your service and your product, wouldn't they refer you anyway without being incentivized? Where do you all stand on that?
Well, personally, I support incentivization, and we kind of do it at various campaigns throughout the year. You do get the bulk of your referrals, actually looking at the data sets that we have, from non-incentivized referrals. Where we use it is strategically to kind of turbocharge key periods. So you're talking about that sort of New Year, Christmas period where traditionally leasing is a bit anemic, and towards the end, especially when you have a high volume of people coming from clearing universities, and they have other friends that might be also attending the same university. So if you use it in the right way, you can actually turbocharge and kind of overachieve. And it's, again, very cheap to do compared to other marketing costs as well.
Hannah, John, do you have anything to add?
I'll tell you, so my experience of kind of like refer a friend campaigns, I mean, in the early years, it was always a bigger part of the kind of marketing plan. But in more recent times, I found it to be less successful. We would only, from memory, we'd only get 10 to 15 kind of refer a friend type per building. Even if, I think what Fathi said is true, that you'd use it at specific times within the marketing sort of calendar. But I never found it overly successful. And perhaps, we tried a variety of the amount of money that we were offering for the referral, but it didn't ever feel that it was ever going to be that significant. And it was always one of those kind of activities just kind of ticks over in the background. It's always there and just promoted at like key points. I mean, there was the occasion where you get the really entrepreneurial student that would refer like 10 people. And that's brilliant. I think that's great for them. And, it worked both ways. But this is not as common as I guess we would have liked.
Yeah, you just need one of those students, really. We had one incident where, I won't say which city, but one of the sort of hockey society members literally referred the entire team. And I think they've probably paid for their first semester's rent just through the referrals.
I think that's
great, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah, exactly how it should be used. I think sometimes it's taken advantage of, and people come as a group and then want their referral incentive. But it's like, if you came as a group, you would have done that anyway. So yeah, it's I guess, for, you know, as a marketeer's point of view, it's a great message to put across, and it gives people, you know, a reason to start that dialogue, really. But yeah, the majority of viewers today agreed with incentivizing people to refer. The other question that we posed is, you know, what about incentivizing people to book or to rebook in the first place? You know, are we getting into an industry of kind of, you know, constant like Sports Direct offers where people just get used to being incentivized and having offers? And Hannah, I guess this doesn't really happen in the HMO market. You book or you don't book. You know what? Yeah. You know, what are you seeing out there?
Well, just to some of our partners in the PBSA and build to rent world, I find it really interesting sometimes when they give us like, okay, you know, incentivize these groups by saying we'll buy them an Xbox or speakers if they rent within the next 2 weeks. And I always think, wow, that's an amazing offer. They're going to jump on it, and they never do. And I'm always really interested that it's actually, when you're doing making such a big decision, the extra Xbox doesn't actually push them over the line when they're, you know, debating 2 different builds, and it's actually more about the location and the type of property and the general environment, which I think is quite interesting. But then in terms of incentivizing to book, I think it's also something to be aware of, I guess, is you don't want the wrong person in the building. So you don't want someone who's just done it to earn an extra couple £100 and then they end up, you know, not joining in an event, not wanting to be there, having a really bad time, and then, you know, creating a bad environment for people next door, or just, you know, telling their friends that they didn't have a very good year. So that's not worth it. So I think it's really about incentivizing the right people. And at HYBR, what we do is it's all about incentivizing the early adopters, like the people that hear our story and that love what we're doing. So within our kind of ambassador program, it really makes sense for us to incentivize those people because they've really bought into what we're doing. So I think it's just being careful who you're incentivizing and making sure you're doing it in the right way.
Yeah, also the build to rent operators are heavily incentivizing. Just go back to the last question. I live in Manchester. I've lived in a build to rent. I own my own house now. What I found, the students that are there, they're typically older. You're seeing the type of offers where it's like low essentially barrier to booking. So low deposits, advanced rent. So they're becoming more savvy, and also those operators, you know, they have similar brands to the PBSA brands as well. So naturally, they're targeting a similar clientele just from the brand's look and feel. And I'm sure they're doing a little bit of boosting as well from the adverts that I get on my Facebook on student search terms as well. So they are actively going after that market. And it makes sense in some cities like Manchester, where, you know, if you try to book a student room right now in Manchester, you know, you've got 1 month left and the market's fully booked. So you're probably going to a build to rent product or a HMO if they're still available.
We've had a question from one of our viewers, from Giuliano. It's more of a comment, I guess, than a question, but she said, we have referral campaigns, but not only as a marketing strategy, but to measure how our current students are proud and want their friends to live with them, and we want them to become our best ambassadors. So I guess that kind of leads on to the question of, you know, are incentives and referrals being used as a barometer of customer service and success? 63% of our youth forum respondents said they check reviews before booking accommodation, which is obviously another way to kind of check how you're doing. How do you kind of see reviews in kind of benchmarking?
For me, go ahead, John.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Fathi. Yeah. I think, you know, reviews are critical, and it's an interesting way to kind of benchmark you against other providers. I think within the student field, obviously it's a little bit diluted, that you've got Student Crowd, you've got you know, student hall bookers and the Google reviews, and again, as I mentioned earlier, you're probably, for Google, you're aiming for that above 4 towards 4.5, and you're checking your competitors and you're seeing that they've got, you know, hundreds and they're like 4.8, 4.9, and you're thinking, wow, that's, you know, how have they achieved that? But I think, interestingly, from a build to rent perspective, if anyone, I recommend people check out the Home Views website, which is like a professional way of reviewing all of the services within a large part of the build to rent market. And what it does, it uses the key metrics of like management, design, value, location, and amenities. And it's a really fascinating read to check on what the top performing assets built to rent providers are providing. And particularly in Manchester, like you say, Fathi, there's over 50 build to rent blocks currently open. And the top performing assets are kind of averaging like 4.7, 4.8 out of 5, which is really impressive. And you read the comments, the level of service that they're managing to deliver is absolutely amazing. The real attention to detail, lots of kind of feedback saying that all staff go above and beyond. And it's a real insight into, what can be done with the right kind of infrastructure and staff working for these companies. So I feel that's, I've used that as a benchmark to try and look at what they're providing and, can you move that into PBSA? So I just think currently it's a little bit, across a few platforms, but definitely worth a look.
And I just had a question around the kind of what Hannah was saying around kind of her response rates for people offering incentives. And is the sector looking at that data enough to actually really understand what is working, what's not working, how we can use data in a better way, so that we are strategizing, I guess, for the right bookings at the right time? Or is it just part of the marketing mix that we've always done and we do it as part of that kind of process?
I think like the leaders in this, when I used to work at IQ, they had a really great data system and platform to kind of see which offers work best and which offers are gaining the most traction. And, they track that year on year. For us smaller players, it really depends on which cities we think are at risk, which cities we think we might be struggling, that might need a little bit of a boost. So we kind of use it as an ad hoc strategy rather than a consistent strategy like IQ does every single year. So for us, it's harder to gain that long-term view as to what really works and what doesn't, because we just know, like we did a campaign in the summer for this particular city, it really worked. Will it work next year? Hard to know. So the data is a bit sketchy.
And what other benefits? Because they could impact reviews, but are there any other benefits that you can see around creating incentive campaigns around rebooking and referring?
You have to keep your offer fresh every single year. So we did rent discounts one year. The following year, when the rebooking launches, we wouldn't maybe do a rent discount. We might do a cashback, and then it might be like a goodie bag. So we try to keep it fresh every single year so that essentially last year's marketing campaign is not confusing with this year's marketing campaign. And also, it also depends on the amount of money we have to spend on it. So, but the idea of keeping it fresh every single year really works for us because, we're kind of creative that way, and we try to come up with, innovative ideas that might not have been tried before, and just to see if it might work or not.
I think another thing to bear in mind, though, is that in the student world, it is very normal to move. As in that there's in every city that we work in, there's clear hubs of where first years like to live, second years, third years, master's students. And I think it is part of the university experience to want to explore a different area of that city to make you feel like you've had a kind of holistic experience of that university experience. So I think that although it makes so much sense to offer these incentives, and I think it's a great thing if a student wants to stay on, to build that community and build that relationship with that landlord or that management team. But I think also within this industry, maybe unlike the professional renting world, it's a natural thing for them to kind of move on. And I think, it's about making sure they have all the options there so they can facilitate that move and they can experience different parts of the city.
I think that's a really important point, Hannah, that, maybe, I don't know, we take offence or think that there's something that you could do better to keep students there. But moving away from incentives, what considerations are there around product, location and price to impact longevity, you know, because like I said, Hannah, if people want to experience something else, you know, what is that something else, you know, or is there anything, you know, or do we just accept that year after year students do just tend to move on?
I think that point that Hannah said, that actually it's a bit of a rites of passage, isn't it? That in some places that you will go to, you know, you live in a house, you know, your first year is generally in some kind of halls of residence perhaps, and then you'll move to a house. I guess the private PBSA sector has tried to break that norm because we want people to stay in their own buildings, and like I say, look at every which way of trying to do that. And some years, I think, you know, you'd aim for perhaps 30% of your rebooker pool to rebook. Some years you might get slightly higher, and some years you might get slightly lower. And as I mentioned earlier about the profile of your years, you know, can change. I think another, just a slight on the side, I think what's really interesting about you know, the rent setting process is that it's a critical discussion to include about rebookers and how you're going to incorporate them into your kind of strategy. I do think that operators are under huge pressure to kind of reduce costs and maximize income, because of, you know, ultimately about the valuation of the asset. And I think that there's a fine line, isn't there, between reducing marketing spend, reducing your rents and balancing that out alongside the kind of competitive nature in the city. Because in some cities you might feel a bit more bullish that, you know, like Bristol, for example, this year was bursting at the seams. There's not enough rooms in the city. Everyone was placed in the outside towns. So there, if there wasn't any new supply coming on board, you might not, you know, reduce your rates so much and feel confident. But perhaps in like Coventry and Sheffield, where there's lots of supply, you may be thinking, well, actually, we've got, you know, a reasonable occupancy this year. We want to attract them. And likewise, you know, I think we've had instances where you've had a competitor build a 500-bed building opposite yours. If that happens, suddenly you change your whole, you know, you're going to change your strategy to kind of accommodate that. So I think each market and each city has its own dynamics, and you've got to be able to recognize and adapt to that as the market changes.
Yeah, I would. Go on, Hannah.
I was just going to add on, just like from our insights, there's two things that we've noticed from why students, if they're going to rebook or not. And those two things are housemates. So do they like the people that they live next to, or have they met new friends that they want to move it in with? So if you can accommodate that they've made these new friends, can they move into the rooms next door? Or are they going to want to move because they've met some new people that they want to live with? It's all about housemates. And the second one is, in the first year, they either decide, okay, I'm going to go through a PBSA to get that better experience, and I'm prepared to spend more, but I can't afford it for my next 2 years. Or they say the first year, I'm happy to stay further out of the city and actually spend less, but then I want to have a better experience for my third year when I need to work harder. So I think it's like those two things, just in terms of the insights that we get for why students stay on or move.
I was just thinking, oh, go on, sorry, Fathi, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to, similar point, really. The biggest determining factor for me, you know, is you don't have to even overcomplicate it. What will you do is, do you like the people you're living with?
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you might move across the flat across the road where, you know, you have your friends living there. Or if you do, you're going to stay put.
Yeah, agree. And I was just going to say that one of the things that kind of listening to the conversation is that the complexity of that decision-making process of why people make decisions to stay where they are, which is beyond price. It's about people, it's about their choices, it's about that rite of passage. Do you, like, one of the things we discovered in kind of the youth forum is the role of like the operation management team on site and the way that they can really make or break an experience. How have you seen, I guess, the communication channels, the way that we work with those operators to ensure you get the best of customer service and that consistent customer services kind of change over the years?
I think there's a sector problem with customer service. And to all the leaders kind of listening right now, all I have to do is ask you one question. How much time do you dedicate to sales training versus customer sales training? And the ratio is probably 10 to 1, 20 to 1. So you put all that work into making sure your sales campaigns are very effective, your sales people are highly trained, but actually on the service delivery side, there's not enough customer service training, and that's the challenge that I see personally in the sector.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me on to the next question, really, and we just did a poll about it as well. So one way of benchmarking customer service, and I guess therefore giving you key performance indicators to contribute to training, is about mystery shops. Have you ever conducted mystery shops or used professional companies to mystery shop to benchmark your own service? Most people we polled said yes, 60% said yes.
So I learned this many years ago. There was a gentleman called Greg Gerard, and he taught me that when you visit a competitor, right, you always don't ever pretend to be a student. So I've never actually gone into a competitor building and introduced myself as something other than who I am. But I'm sure my staff have at some point in the past. Yeah, we have used service providers to mystery shop our own people, just to see if we're executing our sales plans, but we don't really do it to shop other competitors.
I think from my own experience, I think mystery shopping is a vastly underutilized service. Now, I'm going to credit you, Sarah, with this. That actually, when Sarah joined IQ all those years ago, one of the first things she said to me was that she'd mystery shopped one of my buildings. And she wanted to understand the business that she was joining and understand how we marketed and sold the rooms. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant, a genius idea. And ever since then, I've now mystery shopped numerous student accommodation and BTR buildings in the UK and Spain, not only for research, because I think it's really fantastic opportunity to have a look at your competitors, look at the building specification, the finish, and what facilities they have. But I also think it's really fascinating to learn about the company's approach to sales and the experience and how they talk to you, what questions they ask, what data they collect, how they end their viewing, how they're going to close the sale. And I think, Sarah, you've posted some data on this before, is that the key to this is the follow-up. And the amount of times people don't follow up when you've been to view a property, I think is incredible. That it's so important that if you've got their data, you need to chase them. They're a key sale. So I would always make sure that for staff that I'm kind of involved with, that I'm always amazed that they haven't mystery shopped the competition in their town, and always make that part of an induction program. Because I think it's important that they have a look at the competition and they report back on their experience, because then they can build their own learnings from that viewings and understand about that, the importance of how they behave, how they talk, and they can improve themselves. So I always think that mystery shopping is key to the business. And from our own perspective, you tell the staff you're going to do it, and I think it's a learning thing. It shouldn't be seen as a negative, and it can be hugely beneficial.
Hannah, do you see any of this activity going on in the HMO world with landlords and agents?
I think I really would doubt that the mystery shop or anything like this goes on, and it should do. But I think for us as a tech business, we're always going through the customer journey. So we're always going through everyone swapping roles and seeing what it's like to go through if you were a student or if you were a landlord. And one of our promise to our students is that no matter what happens throughout the year, if they need anything was to go wrong, they can get back in touch with us. So in that way, for us, it's really important that we vet all the landlords. So we use reviews to decide who we work with in terms of bringing on accommodation supply. But then it's also really important for us to be part of that journey, so we can see how they manage and how they look after the student, and we can provide extra support to take the kind of pressure off the accommodation provider that we work with, and better support those students throughout the year. Because I think it can be quite daunting for the student. They have a lot of questions that they don't feel like they can ask, or they're a bit intimidated navigating the rental space the first time. So it's really important for us to be that person that they can go to.
Giuliano has made a comment that she's based in Brazil, and she says we don't only hire third-party mystery shops, but we pay students who live in competitors to give us valuable insights. So not a traditional strategy, but very good. So I guess potentially if somebody's booked with you but they live somewhere else, then you can get valuable insight. Why did they book you? Why did they left? And get the insight that way. Another question that Giuliano had was slightly different to mystery shops, is about NPS. obviously there's various different methods of measuring success and reviews. The National Student Housing Survey and creating NPS scores are just some of those. I think from mine and Dini's point of view, we very much respect and value customer feedback, but only if you're going to act on the results that you've had. It shouldn't just be a vanity metric to boast that you've won something. You actually, actually looking at the negative side of things is probably much more important than looking at the fantastic reviews. Have any of you had experience with looking at NPS scores?
Yeah, we measure it about 3 times a year. So we do an internal one on sort of check-in, and then we use the sort of global student living, I think they call now, one in the spring. And then we usually kind of measure one question at the end to see how their sort of feedback was, with a comment box as well. And we generally tend to find, people are buzzing at the start of the year, typically in the 50s. We kind of drop down to the mid 30s during sort of the student housing survey time. And then at the end, if you're positive, it's very good because, for one reason or another, the experience just seems to slide as the year goes on. And we try to act on the feedback every single year through sort of our check-in and turnaround prep. So if you can capture hearts and minds during that first month, it goes a long way.
Yeah.
I think some of the feedback you get is invaluable to your service provision. I think with those surveys that from the past, the main things that come up are things generally by third parties, like the internet provision and laundry service, and it has come a long way with kind of like Laundry View and the internet providers. On the whole, provide a fantastic service. And 90% of the issues is normally user related, but I think it's the things with those with those third party kind of services on site is that I think historically sometimes the management teams, and I've been part of this, where we try to try and deflect it, and you might blame the third party, and then we've evolved and actually try and refer the student to speak to them. Whereas now I think actually they're not really bothered that it's not owned by you. They're renting from you. They want you to fix it. So I think now it's more really important that the owners of those buildings, they'll take ownership of those issues if they're not directly responsible for those services. I think having done that in the last few years, I think it does make a big difference, particularly for those schools with those surveys and the feedback you get.
Yeah. I mean, in the youth forum that we recently did on customer service, but also Dini and I have been working on a research project for a client who manages several thousand students, and maintenance was something that was, I would say it was very emotive actually, some of the results that we get. And why do you think that is, and how important is great maintenance when it comes to that aspect of customer service?
I think the press, everything, all the horror stories in the press that you hear about before you go to university exasperates the whole situation. And I think that people just need to remember, which is what we say probably every day, is just that you're dealing with a human and you just need to communicate. The issue probably is not going to be fixed in the next few hours, and it doesn't need to be fixed in the next few hours. But I think people, and this is especially in the agency world, forget that the student just wants to be reassured and empathized with and communicated. There needs to be good communication. So I understand this is a concern. Give some context. This problem usually arises when X, Y, and Z happens. Just Google it quickly. And then this is when we roughly expect someone to come in, like, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. And just that human response goes such a long way. And I think that's just often forgotten because both sides, the landlord thinks that the student's going to be really unreasonable and the student thinks that they're going to be ignored.
And that came across very strongly in a couple of our forums on customer service and on maintenance around that. They're happy if there's a problem, but just communicate in the right way, I think.
Yeah, has anyone come across an amazing process? We've seen students tweeting from their bedrooms, to make a complaint. And there's obviously processes that you have in place that are much more efficient. What in your experience works well when dealing with maintenance issues?
So just to go back to the first question, So what I would say to senior leaders, asset managers, people underwriting deals is, if you're getting quotes for £25 a bed OPEX for maintenance, that's probably why your students hate you, right? These are £40 million buildings and they can't be maintained on 10,000 a year, right? So if it's properly resourced, there's no issues really, because jobs get done with, usually get a little bit of stress during September when everybody moves in, but you resource it properly, you get everything fixed, you keep your customers happy. But if you're planning to meet some benchmark or a budget, it's going to go wrong, right? And what that does is add stress to property managers, because they're incentivized to meet budget, so they don't make decisions. And then some asset managers insist on never going over budget, so you have to wait for them to make a decision. And as Hannah was saying, students are stressed out, there's no empathy, and it's with somebody at head office, quote unquote. So that's I think a problem within the industry. And I'll kind of pass on the next point to John, who I think had a point to make. Go ahead, John.
I think I want to build on that point you just made, actually. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned about the budgets, because I think the student accommodation buildings, by their design are complex and have lots of really large and expensive pieces of kit and machinery within them, and maintaining them is a challenge. And for new buildings particularly, the large infrastructure can fail. And the amount of times I've dealt with lifts breaking down in 20-floor buildings, and people can't have to use the stairs, and then there's no hot water. And this is a real challenge for any operational team to manage that, because you're at the forefront, you're dealing with the customer, you're dealing with complex machinery, and perhaps if the investment was made and the building specification was lower and they were under pressure to reduce their costs, the impact is the residents will suffer and the operational team need to sort it out. And I think that's a real challenge. And I think the way to kind of move forward from that is that operational teams need to be included within the development teams, and I think they work much closer together now than perhaps they used to. And operational staff need to have a real input so they can help the design of these buildings and give a realistic view on what budgets and what it's going to cost to run them. And I think that could alleviate some of these challenges. Just back to the first part of your question, I think what can help with the kind of responding or dealing with maintenance, day-to-day maintenance anyway, is the technology. And I know that there's a move towards having apps. Every provider will have a portal, but I think all BTR or most BTR now have an app, and you have a seamless kind of process of reporting. And there's software like by companies like FixFlow, which will give you like step-by-step guides of like how to report exactly what you've got, and you send live photos and manage it. And it's actually really effective systems. And alongside having that technology, I think you need great staff. Good maintenance staff are really, like everywhere, are really hard to find, and they kind of follow that boom bust cycle of the construction world, where you're at the mercy of that. Where and Brexit probably doesn't help either. They're actually getting the good staff at times of construction boom is really difficult. And then once you've got them, you've got to keep them. But if you can get the staff and the technology, and you've got those systems and infrastructure in the background, I think that really helps in that speed and that process of getting things turned around, because ultimately that's what the student wants. They report a problem, they want it fixed. They don't want a lot of drama, and there's all this stuff in the background which is that you have to manage, which they don't see, can make it more complicated. So if you can avoid that, I think that really helps.
I just want to ask a question about international students. A lot of what we've talked about is quite complex and confusing. I can only imagine what it must be like to live in a foreign country and not speak the language. So, what is there anything different, that you think can be done in the industry when communicating great customer service to international students? Or are their expectations different?
I think their expectations are different. So I have two favorite jobs or tasks in this industry. Number one is I like to staff the stack trolley desk at check-in. And that's where you get to meet a lot of international students coming with luggage, etc. And you get to talk to them. And what you find is that there's two types that you find. One is the people that just here for the experience. They're probably loaded at home. For them, everything is kind of chill and they just want to get to their room and relax. And there's the other ones who are just completely stressed out. You know, their parents have kind of mortgaged the house, invested everything in their education, and they're hoping that everything is fantastic. And for me, having those conversations and having a well-resourced check-in kind of reassures people, de-stresses the environment. You're talking to parents, you're talking to the residents themselves. And by engaging with them and sort of setting that expectation early on that check-in went smoothly, everything was great, your room was clean, well-maintained, setting a high standard early is one of the things that I like to do and encourage within my teams to make sure that their sort of high expectations and that hassle-free expectation is met.
John or Hannah, have you got anything to say that's sort of different that applies to international students?
I think that's a really nice point raised, and I think that it's just exactly about understanding the different requirements of these students. And of course, like, just to go through, everyone will know, but it's the visa applications, it's the SIM card, it's the taxi from the airport. It's just about those small touches and giving them the available of different services that it can exist, that you can pre-vet and you can offer them to ensure that they have that seamless experience when they first arrive. That will just make the whole experience less stressful. And then in terms of language, I mean, yeah, the small things again, like maybe if you know that you have a large amount of Chinese students coming into your building, making sure that there's a translated part of the website to cater for those students. So just really understanding who your demographic is, who you're appealing to, and being, yeah, as prepared as you can.
I think a lot of the things that we've discussed today kind of feel like it's blending kind of hospitality and home, really. You know, we're all talking about people's homes for a year, but great customer service, maintenance, turnaround times, language, you know, challenges, they're all things that have been, you know, seamlessly done in hospitality, you know, for forever. Do you think that the student accommodation and build to rent sectors kind of can be elevated to that level of hospitality that we've grown used to?
Just one thing to say, and which is, Sarah, was something that we've spoken about before, which is something to bear in mind, that I think a lot of copy and exaggeration, or everyone likes to talk about all these amazing services they provide students and all these amazing cinema rooms and tennis courts and all these things that they provide for students, but they don't actually focus on what really matters, and that's the small touches of the good communication and the trained staff who are there to help and answer those questions. And I think if you actually speak to your customer base and understand what they actually think is important and what they value, you might actually have less of the vanity metrics, or not metrics, sorry, the vanity things for show, and more of the small touches that actually don't cost anything, but makes people feel more welcomed and have a really good experience. And maybe we should be prioritizing less the hospitality and all these flashy and showy experiences, and actually thinking more about maybe reducing prices and offering a bit more affordable options on the market, so you can cater for students who don't want all of those additional resources, and they just want a bit more of a plainer experience, something that they can actually afford and fits within their budget.
Yeah, same opinion as Hannah, really. You know, you'll be very successful running a sort of slimmed down operation as long as your price point is very attractive in this inflationary environment. And on the other side, I think the ultra high end will do very well as well. So if you can justify the premium rents, international student numbers are growing, people expect more, you know, you'll do very well there. The middle ground, where you're not providing enough services, you know, it's kind of a basic streamlined service model, but you're expecting higher rents, I think that's where you might struggle with that sort of elevation to hospitality.
I think that's a good point, Fathi, actually. From my experience, you know, I've recruited lots of staff from the hospitality world, and they have moved seamlessly from like hotels to PBSA, and brought all of their hospitality skills and experience into new roles, and really like elevated the buildings and the service provision. Because I think, you know, like the points raised, really resources are the key here. I think resources are tight and perhaps focused on the wrong areas. And like you say, it's really fascinating to talk. I think we all recognize that, you know, training and that service provision is sometimes not as high up on the list as it should be. And I think that that's recognised. And I particularly think with with larger organisations that there's more central support towards the kind of the site-based teams with a training commitment and the infrastructure, so they can provide that experience. They can have all the social events. They can provide the necessary support and guidance and advice to students that they need. Then service levels can continue to rise. But I think, like I say, that middle banding of properties where the vast majority falls, that some perform this better than others, and I think there should be an alignment of perhaps where focus should be moving forward.
Thank you. I've got one last question. Where do you think we'll see change in the future when it comes to customer service?
I'm personally skeptical about all the apps. I don't know if anybody else is, but I'll put my hand up to say that. I've spoken to a lot of students in my time, and I've never heard one of them say, you know what, I'd like another landlord app and portal. So apps and technology, I'm not too sure. I'm not maybe a portal, but I'm not too sure how they will be used. I'm not seeing any that are highly effective as of yet. But one thing I am kind of looking at more intently is the smart home tech. I think as we look to develop more properties ourselves, how we can integrate some of the sort of cutting edge features to make the home more, I guess, convenient. That's where my personal interest is, to see how we can, move into the smart home tech into the PBSA arena.
Any other crystal ball psychic moments? What else is happening in the future?
I'm going to say something which is actually, I have to give credit to Nathan from Student Rooster. We were talking about this the other day, but it was a really interesting conversation around how the PBSA world is getting more and more expensive, but the service is getting amazing. It's getting growing and getting better and better as the days go on. And the HMO world is under pressure to improve standards, and they can no longer have houses half falling down and giving these students being abused by the landlords, etc. So I think what's going to happen over time is what we're talking about is the HMO market is going to improve, and the PBSA market, after they all try and go for the 1% of students that have those budgets, is going to have to come down a notch. And eventually the HMO and PBSA market are going to start merging slightly and start looking a bit more similar in terms of offering a similar experience. And I think that's going to be really interesting, and it'll be a really great thing.
And okay, so finish up. I think that the most prominent will be the ESG commitment of each companies will become more kind of prominent in people's minds before they buy kind of goods and services. I think companies that prioritize kind of diversity and equality, and people want to buy from companies that are ethically and socially responsible. And I think that will become more and more important as the years go on, before people make their decisions. So that will be increasingly part of our kind of company strategy in the next sort of 5 years or so.
Fantastic, thank you all. That was really, really interesting. We have come to the end of our time, although there would have been more things to talk about, I'm sure, and we have got some unanswered questions which we'll come back to off air and try and revert back on social media with some of those questions. So I'll pass over to Dini just to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks everyone. That was a really, really interesting chat. So thank you. Next month, Sarah and I are really delighted to be able to start sharing a brilliant piece of research that we've been doing with our partner UPP around the future of home according to Gen Z. So we're going to do a bit of our own takeover of our property marketing lounge, where over the next 6 months we'll be using this platform to bring you those insights from our survey of 16 to 18-year-olds, current surveys and recent graduates, to really build up a picture of what the customer wants from build to rent, BTR, from build to rent, PBSA and co-living. So really looking at those expectations versus the reality. So we've really enjoyed working on it, and we can't really wait to share the insights to that for the sector. And big thanks to UPP, who's been our kind of partner supporting us with that. So please look out on our kind of website and our social platforms to register for the webinar and also to access that report. And we are looking for a sponsor for the series. So if you do want to get in touch with us around that and you want to get your brand in front of a really engaged audience, our kind of response rate and engagement rates are really, really strong at the moment. And yeah, please do get in touch and we'd love to have a chat. And once again, a big thank you to all of our guests and panelists. We obviously couldn't do it without you. And a big thank you to all our attendees for joining us and all the great questions and being so engaged. So thank you very much, everyone.